Property and trust, they go together like peas and carrots. This is a pretty interesting session. We're going to talk all things trust, all things property. And this is the thing, like social media, like literally go to YouTube right now. Don't skip this session. This is actually pretty good. But you just type in trust lending and unlimited borrowing capacity for trust. And there's a whole heap of stuff in the media, a whole heap of stuff that's come up in the last 12 to 24 months about property trusts that allow you to hide properties away and get this unlimited borrowing to build a property portfolio. Now, there unfortunately is reality in this world. So this is a very balanced view of diving deep into what are the benefits of trusts, how they work, how are they structured, how we should think about them and how they help property investors, but also like what are the pros, what are the cons, what are the things that don't necessarily help you as a property investor. And this is with an accountant, Alesha from Tap App, and she crushes this session. Hey everyone, my name is Joe, and together with Jeff Miles, we created Oz Property Investors, and each week we interview top property experts, and we talk about all things property. Tonight is with Alesha. She as the tax app accountant business, and really dives deep into this whole trust situation, because without trust, people start to get a little bit stuck in their lending, maybe, or their borrowing, maybe. What are the benefits? What are the pros? What are the cons? How can we use these as a property investor to push our journey forward? Because just because someone says you can't borrow, there might be another way to make it happen. But let's dive deep into it. What is a trust, and why you typically see property investors use them? Like, what is the actual, why do they do it? So what is it? Why do they do it?
Yeah, for sure. And to be able to do that, I think it's really important to go back slightly, take a step back and like truly understand what a trust is. So like the trusts were developed when people left for crusades. So I know we hear a lot about trusts, but we don't actually understand what they are. And I think if people do that, it will help them like get a good sense of why we have them. So people left for crusades back in the day, and then they would leave their property and their like stuff for their family and friends to look after. And that's how the concept of trust came about. So essentially what happens in a trust is it's a legal relationship where one person like holds the property or assets for another person. I'm calling it assets because you can hold whatever you want, but property specifically in this podcast, right? For the benefit of someone else. So you've got this little triangle going. And the reason why they are used so commonly now, because they're a fantastic structure for tax minimization, almost creating a separate legal entity, not really, or let's just call it a separate entity, because it's not fully that. And they're great for things like asset protection, family wealth planning, tax planning, even superannuation. That's a trust, and for holding investment assets. So that's like, and to be able to use it in property isn't a new thing. It's just a new thing for people because it's been commercialized on YouTube or on podcasts these days.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So to kind of dive in, that's what this is, illustration of, breaking down a little bit more.
Yeah. So I think this primarily helps support or helps people understand what the different elements of a trust actually are. So, for example, like when you're setting up a trust, you need to have a few different elements before it becomes like a proper, I guess, trust. I'm going to just zoom in my screen properly here. So you need a settler, and the settler is the person who settles, I guess, the trust. And the trustee is the person who runs the trust. Essentially, they are the ones who control the trust assets. They control where the income of the trust goes.
Yep.
And then one of the key people in the trust is also an appointer. An appointer is the person who can kick out the trustee or keep the trustee. And people forget about the appointer when they're having these conversations. So if your relationship with the trustee goes sour, then you need to have the power. You need to make sure you know who the appointer of the trustee is to be able to tap on their shoulder and go, hey, can you remove the trustee? Can you
And
update the trustee?
who has that? Who typically has that power? Like, who is usually assigned that appointer? Who's usually the settler? Um, yeah.
So settler is the person who writes the trust for you.
Okay.
So depending on who you go to, they will end up being the settler of your trust. And it doesn't really matter in the sense, like on the deed, it doesn't matter who your settler is, because once they've settled the trust, your trust can start functioning and it can go off forward. But usually it's an accountant in most scenarios. And then the appointer of the trustee is the person who is wanting to set up the trust. So, for example, if a husband and wife come to my office and they say, I want to set up a family trust, we specifically ask them, who do you want to be named the appointer of the trustee?
Mm. Okay.
And they can
Great.
we usually just pick one person.
Mhm.
And most of the time, it's the husband will put their hand up and he'll say, can I be the appointer? And the wife normally doesn't have have an issue with it. So I'm just like giving you generally what happens.
So, what are those things within the trust deed that are really important that people need to be factoring in when they're getting set up? And that's a big question, I know, but
Big question.
For me, from my perspective,
yeah,
it would definitely be who the trustee is,
yep,
who the appointer is, and who the
yep,
beneficiaries can be, or if it can be like a broad set of beneficiaries. So every time we set up the trust for our clients, we'll talk to them about if they want a corporate trustee or an
yep,
individual trustee.
yep,
And usually a corporate trustee is provides better asset protection compared to an individual trustee. And the reason for that is because if we think about corporate structures, and this may be a bit boring, so sorry about that. But
Mm.
no, okay, very interesting, important.
okay, so yes, it's important. It's very important to know. So a company is considered a separate legal entity in the court of law. So in our legal system, a company is a separate legal entity, and therefore it acts as a separate person. So if you sue a company, you are just suing that company by itself, rather than suing the person who's running the company. And in some instances, you can sue the person as well, but that's very niche circumstances. So when you have a trustee, that's a person, and because that person is now controlling the trust, which is why in the picture that I made, I had like this black line around the trustee to show the dominance or to show the control of the trust that the trustee has over the trust, right? So if you've got a corporate trustee, that's a company that's operating the trust, that's controlling the trust versus an individual. So when an individual, on the other hand, is operating the trust or controlling the trust, that's where your individual liability comes into play. So someone gets unhappy in the trust, or the beneficiaries get unhappy about how the trustee is distributing income, how they're managing the assets, they will sue the person directly. So,
Oh,
which is
spicy.
why,
So they will sue the trustee.
yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Which is
Because
why,
the
thanks,
trustee is
love.
at the trustee is at the top, and the point of the trustee is to act in the beneficiary of the act in the benefit of the beneficiaries. The entire reason the trust is set up is they're at the top there, acting in the best interest of the three people at the bottom, which will be husband, wife, and kid. And if they start doing some tricky stuff, you can get sued, and you're going to get in trouble potentially.
I get
Well,
you.
hopefully they'll just remove you as trustee if they don't like
Oh,
you,
see you
right? If
later.
they've got the power. And if they don't
And
have the power,
beneficiary.
yeah, if the beneficiary doesn't have the power, they'll remove you, or they'll sue you. But if they have the power to remove you as the appointer, then they'll do that.
So that's kind of one of those key points in the trust that Jeff's talking about. Why it's important to kind of have in that trust is what are each one of these roles and why they're important. And I guess there's so many variables for why each person is so different in, like, why have each person in each different role. Yeah, interesting.
Like if somebody comes to you and says, "Okay, Alesha, I want to build a portfolio. Tell me all the things I need to know from a tax perspective," because they've had the conversation with a broker, fantastic, and then they come to you, and a broker's given them, say, "Okay, you've got 800K, $1 million worth of borrowing capacity." They come to you and they say, "Okay, great, that's good to know. What are the things I should be thinking about, Alesha?"
Yeah, that's a great question. I think most of the times a broker will also advise them, or not advise, I should say. They'll mention different types of structures, and then they'll sort of say, "Hey, like, have a chat with an accountant." Like, this is what a good broker would do, right? And some of the times they'll come with an idea as to whether they should buy in a trust, what the benefits are, especially if they've got two investment properties in their personal name, or one or two investment properties in their personal name. They'll now start thinking about, okay, now I'm ready to build a portfolio. Some of the things that they want to know about, or a lot of the times people haven't really don't understand trusts, so they haven't really come across them before, especially at that stage. So asset protection is a big one, which can be, I think, a nuance at times, but it may not be as impactful for some versus others. And these are some of the things that we like. All of these things we'll run with. We'll run through these for everyone, but everyone will give them their own value based on their circumstances because of their own risk profile. So, for example, the reason why I talk about asset protection in that way is if someone says, "My job is like so, I have no risk in my job. Like, I am not getting sued. Like, what are you talking about?" So, therefore, for them, asset protection isn't really like at the top of their radar. But however, you may want to consider things like leveraging. Leverage, as soon as you are leveraging an asset, like getting a loan on an asset, that is a level of risk that you're taking, right? And sometimes because people forget that property, that you're getting a loan on a property, it is still a leverage, right? So they forget about that. And so sometimes it's important to remind people that that is still a risk. Like getting a loan is a risk, kind of, which is a manageable risk, which is why asset protection does come into play when it comes to purchasing a property. What trusts also allow for are things like tax planning flexibility, because as I was talking about before, you can like choose the amount of beneficiaries, and you can choose whoever you want to like allocate your income to. And things like succession planning and estate planning, if you want to like transfer assets to your next generation, it's easy to do it through a discretionary trust rather than if someone passes away and then they go through a will and a testamentary trust. Not saying that's the wrong, like that is also a really good way of it happening, but it's easier to do that. The only thing that we need to be careful of there is section 100A, which sort of talks about avoiding tax. So we don't want to do it in a way that we are avoiding tax. It's more about, finding the right structure and the right distribution for a person's scenario and a family scenario. And therefore, you do it for the benefit of the family instead of like in a tax avoidance kind of manner. And you're absolutely right. It would be a child can't, like, it's not worth distributing to an 18-year-old just because of the admin it would cost and the low value that it is. I remember back in the day, the trusts, you could actually distribute to children, then obviously a lot of people started doing it, so the tax man was like, "Radio, let's stop this from going on." But yeah, so 100A it's a complex area. You have to be careful, about it. But yes, 100%, you can distribute to reasonable family members and potentially bucket companies, but it doesn't actually work for property, and we'll talk about that a bit later. Sorry, quickly wanted to go back to the asset protection point where if someone does have a business or someone has like a litigious job like a surgeon or like someone who's in the media, someone who's got a massive following and things like that, that's where asset protection is like 1,000 times super helpful. Like I'm just saying a vague figure, 1,000, it's not actually a real figure.
Can you guys please answer thoughts on purchasing initial investment property under a trust? And I'll already throw the thing out there that does depend. But what are your kind of pros and cons of individual versus personal? We've talked about it a little bit, but it'd be good to crystallize what you think about that.
Yeah, well, I think you definitely can't get the negative gearing benefit in your first initial property. And that's when you need to run the numbers and you need to work out if, for example, losing that negative gearing benefit, is that going to make you run faster or is that going to make you run slower in a trust? And then also another thing you want to think about is your land tax in a trust versus your personal name, especially for your initial property, and run the numbers thinking about those things, which is why like also thinking about like rental yield, potential capital growth. So all of those elements should help you make that decision as to whether you should buy in an initial, like in your name initially or not. Actually, one thing I forgot was lending. So for example, you also want to work out with your mortgage broker if you can, if you purchase this first property in your personal name, will you be able to move forward again?
Yeah. What's your answer to that question, Jeff, from a broking perspective?
My answer is, how quickly do you want to run? Because if somebody says, like I speak to people and their goals are 300K in 10 years. And I'm like, okay, well, in that situation, we can map it out. And that's great. You want to do that. Here's what you need to make that call. What's most important to you? I'm not telling you need to go into that structure. Speak to your accountant about the negatives. You might need to reassess that goal. Speak to another person who says, oh, I only want 50K in 20 to 30 years. I'm like, okay, well, in that situation, you buying in a trust, you need to go to your accountant, but that may be detrimental to your circumstances. But go and run the numbers and understand that. But yeah, the longer term time frames dictates what the lending should be, Joe. So that's where the initial I strip it back to, well, what do you want? And that'll dictate where your answer wants to go.
Well, I want the most amount of money in the quickest amount of time with the least amount of risk and least amount of frustration. So I want to make that most amount of money.
Trusts are very frustrating, Joe. Trust me.
Yeah, exactly.
When somebody says trust you, you automatically But no,
yeah,
like
but
so much
no, but
paperwork.
I guess yeah. Who cares about the paperwork? But
Well, you said
typically,
least frustration, so your goal is least frustration.
Typically, people, I just don't want to tell first-time investors that they should go out there and purchase in a trust for their first property. Typically, what you see is people getting in their personal names first, and then because as I said, 1, 2, and 3. And then they start to tap out. And it's that kind of final piece that becomes that piece of the puzzle. So you've still got 1 and 2, which are in your personal name, which allows you that tax deductibility, which allows you not having to pay for trust and allows you to do having some flexibility. So as soon as you start getting into trust, you can't take the genie back out of it. Well, yeah, I guess you can buy, you can then continue to buy in your personal name, maybe. Yeah. But typically from every single success, most people I meet, they do not get the first property in their trust. So don't feel scared if you're a brand new property investor and thinking, holy shit, I got to think about this stuff. Speak to an accountant, but yeah, just, you don't need to. Trust isn't the sole goal. I don't want some poor kid going out there being like, oh my gosh, I need to think about trust. You got enough to think about. You got to save for the deposit. Like, just take things one step at a time. You'll get into trust.
I think if they've watched the entire session, I would imagine that they're picking up the vibe that we're not saying that necessarily that first one should be. I wanted to know, what are those big mistakes, personal name or trust, that people are making? Is it sort of going to the accountant and expecting them to work magic, whether that be in the personal name in terms of, what are those big mistakes you're seeing at the moment that people need to be addressing or considering at least?
I think some of the big mistakes are probably some things like not running the numbers beforehand. Like if you run the numbers, you can then figure out if your laying tax surcharges are worth paying. If, for example, the loss of negative gearing in a discretionary trust is worth it. And is it worth like the cost of setting up the trust structure? And the stamp duty trap that occurs if you first buy in your personal name and then your broker tells you that, look,
So bad.
you cannot actually borrow anymore. You'll have to do something. You'll have to move this property into a trust, for example. You'd have to pay stamp duty again. So the biggest mistake is probably forward planning. And in that, you can when you buy a business, when people buy a business, they run proper due diligence over it. They don't just look at TikTok and go, so this person was saying that this area is hot on the market at the moment, so I'm gonna dive deep into it. They run proper numbers, they understand it, they use professionals to help guide them through their journey, and credible professionals who are looking at investments day in and day out from their area, like a buyer's agent would, a mortgage broker would, and an accountant would. So I think having the right advice at the start sets apart my investor clients who are building year on year versus, or not, I shouldn't say building it, I should say growing year on year, growing their portfolio year on year, versus those who end up in a poor position, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'd actually agree, and it's even a mindset, a way of thinking. It's like, because I remember when I first, I don't know about you, Joe, but when I first started investing, I thought that I knew so many things, and I still to some extent think that, but I also realize there's so many things that I don't know that I need to kind of have that conversation, and through those conversations, you actually realize, oh wow. Maybe Joe, you realized it from day one, and maybe you're just a quicker learner than me. But I thought, I'm the bee's knees. I know everything about investing, and I realized, crap, I got woken up pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is let someone be in their lane and be the expert at that, but you have to ask the questions. And now everyone's like, oh, you have the internet, you've got no excuse. And it's kind of like, yeah, but what question do I Google to find the answer to have that conversation with Alesha? Now we chat GPT. Now with ChatGPT, though, you don't have an excuse. Literally, I am chatting with my accountant today, and I am building a portfolio. This is what I have right now. This is what I'm trying to do. What are some of the considerations that I need to have an intellectual conversation with my accountant? Well, the considerations, the three things you should think about is this, 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 and this. And it's like, oh, shit, yeah. And then you have a chat with Alesha, and she's like, well, you also need to consider number 4. Number 1's not a big consideration, but it's like, again, being that whole orchestra leader. But yeah, I think that was actually, I think that's probably the big lesson that I've learned from property investing is like what you're talking about, Jeff, is you can't do it. It's not a solo sport. You can't do this alone. You need experts, and they're going to accelerate things a lot faster, but they need to know their stuff. Like I've had advice from people that just contradicts completely to, like, I've spoken to lawyers, like I was in legal technology. I spoke to a lawyer about one situation, then spoke to another lawyer about another situation, complete opposite opinions. And if I followed one advice, I'd be, hundreds of thousands of dollars worse off if I followed the first guy's opinion. So like, make sure you're getting good people, I guess, in your corner.